Hello, my friends. I'm the Reverend Rick Donato, pastor of All Saints Anglican Parish in Belleville, and we are actually in the Mary Chapel. We are not in our main sanctuary. Main sanctuary. We are in Mary Chapel for the moment. We have all of our weekday services in the Mary Chapel, but also right now we're doing all of our services in general in Mary Chapel until September. Hopefully we'll be back in the main sanctuary again by September. I'm a little underdressed. Normally I am in, whenever I do a service, I'm always typically in vestments, but I'm not doing a service this evening. I'm just coming to you to talk to you, to give you a message. And so I'm just dressed in a clergy shirt without the collar fully on and in shorts because it's hot. It's like 100 degrees in here right now. So, but I'm coming to you this evening because I got an interesting email. It was a question that I've gotten on several occasions. This one was a little more in depth. The first issue that I'd like to address here, because there's three issues that I want to address, and I'm going to do it in a series, okay? Because it's just, I think that doing it all at once, not good. I think that each issue that was brought up in the context of this question, I guess you'd say, it's better to do it in context of three issues. So tonight we are going to talk about the issue of clergy, in particular priests, and marriage. Now, I'm not a Roman Catholic priest. I'm an Anglican priest. And the first question that I got was, as a priest, how do you justify married clergy when the church has for centuries taught that the priest is in persona Christi? Now what that means is that the priest, the theological belief that the priest becomes Jesus, or suffice it to say, for all intents and purposes, becomes one with Jesus when administering the sacraments. And the theology behind this is that because the priest is becoming one with Jesus, in other words, they're kind of no longer two entities. The priest is no longer just an ambassador for God, but actually in a way becomes God. Therefore, since Jesus wasn't married, how could a priest be married? Well, I'm going to address this issue and just this issue for this evening because there were three issues that were brought up, but this one is the one that I'm going to address first. First piece of the puzzle that I would like to say is number one. Up until the 16th century, even in the Roman Catholic Church, priests were technically allowed to get married. There were popes that were married. Saint Peter was married. Most of the apostles were married. In fact, St. Patrick's grandfather was a priest or bishop. We're not really sure. Some documents identify him as being a bishop. Some documents identify him as being a priest. We're not really sure, but we know that he was either one of the two. So this concept of priestly celibacy, that's a new concept. It's only the past 500 years, roughly. And it's specific to the Roman Catholic Church because our brothers and sisters in the Orthodox tradition, guess what? Their priests can get married. And in the Anglican tradition, their priests can get married. Me, I can get married if I want to. Our brothers and sisters in the Lutheran tradition, their priests can get married. And our brothers and sisters in Protestant traditions, across the board, their ministers and clergy can get married. And not only that, but Byzantine Catholic priests, which are technically under the Pope, can get married. So this theology or this concept, and the reason why that is, by the way, is because they were originally Orthodox who became Roman Catholic. And they became Roman Catholic, and they made it an arrangement with the Pope. We'll submit to your authority if you allow us to retain our traditions, their way of dress as far as liturgically, their liturgical traditions, their church traditions, and part of that being the fact that their priests were married. And the Pope said, okay, that seems reasonable enough. So while Roman Catholic priests that are in the Roman rite of the Roman Catholic Church can't get married, technically, right now anyway, unless they were formerly unless they were formerly Anglican priests who became Roman Catholic priests and were married. They can get married, they can become Roman Catholic priests and take their wives with them. And their wives and families are kind of grandfathered in. There are other rites within the Roman Catholic Church that are under the Pope, that have been under the Pope for centuries, that have allowed for married priests. So the theology that is being taught, or that people have been told growing up, that priests need to be celibate, it's not true. It's not true, because there are priests that are technically under the auspice of the Roman Catholic Church that are not celibate, that are in fact married in the church. They're just not part of the Roman rite of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, that being said, part of the first question that was submitted here was, in addition, following along with the question that was given to me, that was posed to me about the issue of priestly marriage and whatnot, was how could a priest be one with Christ and be married? It doesn't make sense. Actually, it makes perfect sense, because we are called to see Jesus in every single person that we meet. We are called to see God in every single person that we meet. We are called to see the Holy Spirit in every single person that we meet, in every single relationship that we have in our lives, whether they be romantic, whether they be not romantic, whether they be with our loved ones, with our children, with our spouse or partner, with our friends, with our enemies for that matter. How could you genuinely, my question, I have a question back at this individual. My question back is, how could you genuinely be one with Christ if you are forbidden to have relationships with other people? Clergy that are mandated to be celibate are discouraged from associating with persons of the opposite sex. That's assuming that they're heterosexual. And if they're gay, even, they're discouraged from associating with persons of the same sex or of people of the opposite sex. So if they're gay in the Roman Church, because we're talking about the Roman Church here, because this individual who messaged me was obviously Roman Catholic. So I'm addressing this issue from that perspective. So the question here is then, why bother being priest? Why bother being priest if you're not going to associate with people, if you have to stay away from people, if you're going to isolate yourself from people? How could you see God in other people if you're not allowed to associate with other people? And not only that, but even more so, we really don't know whether or not Jesus was married. He might have been. We don't have any evidence either way. There's nothing that says he wasn't, and there's nothing that really says for sure that he was. There are some apocryphal writings that allude to the fact that he might have been married, but we don't really know for sure. But the point is that that's irrelevant. We know for a fact the apostles were married. Many of the apostles were married. The reality is this. The reason why clergy in the Roman rite of the Roman Church cannot get married is not really and genuinely truly because of theological reasons. It is because of the fact that at the time, it was just not affordable. Actually, it's not practical. See, we have things like pensions today. We have pensions or 401ks. In the Middle Ages, they didn't have that. So what was happening was, if a priest was married and had like 5 kids, okay, the church was responsible for taking care of the spouse after the priest died for the rest of her life, okay? Not only that, but also there was the issue of inheritance. Typically in the Middle Ages, the firstborn son inherited everything and then would divvy up among the lesser brothers. The sisters typically wouldn't get anything because they would get married. They would be married off or they would become nuns. Well, that's great. But when the leaders of the church are, well, greedy, they might not want to have to give anything to the spouse or take care of the spouse for the remainder of her natural life, however long that may be. That's the first piece. The second piece is this. What about the inheritance issue? The arguments were made that, well, my father had served this church for yada 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 many years, okay? So therefore, a piece of the land of the church should be, for the sake of the fact that he served for 30 years or whatever as priest of this church, a piece of the church land that is not on consecrated ground, whatever, because usually especially in Europe, churches were built on large pieces of property, large pieces of land, large estates for all intents and purposes. So a piece of that estate should go to the oldest son. Okay? The only problem with that is eventually you're going to run out of land. And then what happens to the church? Okay, fine. The Orthodox Church was actually pretty smart. The Orthodox Church didn't have that issue because they dealt with that right from day one. They said, okay, the responsibility of the spouse would be the responsibility of the spouse's well-being after her husband passes away would be on the church. And as far as land inheritance, the only land inheritance that the oldest son would get would be based on whatever the father owned that was of personal ownership, that had nothing to do with the church. Because many priests, especially in the Anglican tradition and even in the Orthodox tradition, have also secular jobs as well. Craftsmen, doctors, lawyers, whatever. In the Roman Church, they began forbidding that. So Roman priests, current anyway, are actually forbidden to hold secular jobs. Which again goes back to how do you see Christ in all people when you're forbidden to associate with all people? Except, when you see them at church, when you're giving them communion, or when they go to confession and they go in the little confession box and you still can't see them. Well, that's a good question. You can't. Seeing Christ in all people means actually having relationships with other human beings. And I don't mean behind closed doors relationships. I mean actual real life friendships, real life relationships, real life. And part of the way to dehumanize the priesthood was to basically eliminate that aspect of it, the relationship aspect of the humanity of the priesthood, and in a way deify the priest. That's wrong. Because priests aren't God. Only God is God. And even during the celebration of the sacraments and even during the administration of the Eucharist, the priest is still, guess what, a human being, serving as perhaps an ambassador for Christ, but not Christ. If that were the case, how many times would Jesus have been sacrificed then? Because do you know how many times priests have been killed on the altar? Oscar Romero, if I'm not mistaken, was executed while celebrating Mass. So what? Was Jesus killed again? So, I will delve into part 2 of this series of questions that was posed to me. God bless you. God loves you. Take care of yourselves and take care of one another. Good night.